The rise of invisible rulemakers. They never stood for election. They never issued decrees. Most people never learned their names. And yet, over time, they began shaping outcomes more reliably than any formal authority ever could. Rules were still being written, but not where anyone expected. London had long believed that power flowed from institutions outward. Laws were drafted, regulations enforced. Authority was visible, procedural, and slow by design. If something mattered enough, it would eventually be written down. That belief held, until behavior began changing faster than rules could follow. To understand why this mattered, we have to return to a moment when influence slipped away from formal governance and into practice itself. Standards emerged not from legislation, but from repetition. Certain methods worked, others didn't. Over time, these patterns hardened into expectations. The reveal came when these expectations began outperforming written rules. Markets responded more strongly to informal norms than to official guidance. If everyone expected a behavior to be acceptable, it became acceptable in practice. Even before authority acknowledged it, rules were no longer declared. They were assumed. Invisible rule makers began to form, not individuals, but mechanisms, templates, benchmarks, models. Contract language reused so often it became default. Technologies embedded assumptions that shaped behavior automatically. The rule was no longer enforced. It was encoded. London felt the shift everywhere. Compliance teams followed written law, while traders followed market convention. Institutions obeyed regulations, but optimized around norms. Power moved quietly into places that never claimed it. These invisible rules were efficient. They reduced friction. They coordinated behavior without debate, but they also escaped scrutiny. No one voted on them. No one revised them publicly, and yet they governed outcomes with remarkable consistency. London was entering an era where the most powerful rules were the ones no one officially wrote. And once governance moved from documents into defaults, the city would have to confront a new question: who governs the rules that no one can point to? As invisible rules took hold, London's financial system began operating on two levels at once. Official regulations remained in place, debated and enforced through formal channels. But alongside them, a quieter framework guided everyday decisions, one shaped by habit, efficiency, and shared expectation. Participants learned these rules without instruction. New entrants absorbed them through practice. Certain structures were used because everyone used them. Certain risks were accepted because they had been accepted before. What felt normal became correct. What deviated felt dangerous. This created remarkable coordination. Decisions aligned without meetings. Markets moved smoothly without commands. Invisible rules reduced uncertainty by telling participants what was likely to be rewarded or punished. Compliance was social, not legal. The danger emerged when these norms drifted from their original purpose. Assumptions embedded years earlier continued guiding behavior even as conditions changed. Models encoded yesterday's logic into today's decisions. Defaults persisted long after their rationale faded. Because these rules were unwritten, they were hard to challenge. No authority could revise them directly. Breaking from convention carried reputational risk. Questioning norms felt like questioning competence. The system rewarded conformity quietly and consistently. London's institutions struggled to respond. Formal oversight targeted documented rules, while real behavior followed informal ones. Enforcement missed the true drivers of outcome. Power had shifted into layers no one officially governed. Tension grew when invisible rules amplified risk. Losses spread through structures no regulation had addressed. When asked why decisions were made, participants answered honestly. This is how it's done. No one had decided. Everyone had followed. The city confronted a troubling reality. Governance had not disappeared. It had gone underground. Rules were still shaping outcomes, but without transparency, accountability, or review. London now faced a critical challenge. How do you govern systems where the most powerful rules are the ones no one remembers creating? The conflict sharpened when invisible rules began producing visible damage. Losses appeared that no regulation had anticipated. Failures clustered in places that looked compliant on paper but fragile in practice. Investigations followed the formal trail, and found nothing broken. Institutions were confused. Rules had been followed. Reports were accurate. Procedures intact. Yet outcomes were undeniably wrong. The system was behaving exactly as designed, just not as intended. The problem was not violation. It was repetition. Invisible rules had hardened into reflex. Models reused assumptions without reassessment. Templates embedded risk preferences that no longer match reality. Technologies executed logic at scale, enforcing norms faster than humans could question them. What once coordinated behavior now amplified error. The danger intensified because no single actor could change the rules. Deviating from defaults carried cost. Acting differently required justification others might not accept. Invisible rules were enforced socially, not legally. Breaking them felt reckless. Even when following them felt dangerous. Inside London, tension grew between formal authority and practical power. Regulators issued guidance that failed to shift behavior. Institutions nodded publicly and reverted privately to convention. The real rules were not in documents. They were in systems, habits, and expectations. The breaking moment came when a widely used standard failed catastrophically. A structure trusted precisely because it was common collapsed under stress. Its failure rippled across firms that had never coordinated directly, but had all relied on the same invisible logic. Confidence cracked, not just in outcomes, but in understanding. If no one could explain why decisions converged so dangerously, how could the system correct itself? Governance could not address what it could not see. London confronted a stark truth. Invisible rules are powerful precisely because they are unexamined. They shape behavior without debate, resist change without resistance, and persist long after their usefulness expires. The city now faced a difficult choice. Expose the rules that coordinated everything, or remain governed by patterns no one could control. The resolution began with illumination rather than enforcement. London realized that invisible rules could not be banned, but they could be surfaced. The city focused on making defaults visible, assumptions explicit, and conventions discussable. Institutions began mapping the norms that guided behavior. Templates were reviewed. Models were interrogated. Practices once taken for granted were questioned openly. By naming the rules, London returned them to human control. This transparency changed incentives. When assumptions were visible, they could be challenged. When norms were documented, they could evolve. Invisible power lost its quiet authority and became subject to scrutiny. Governance regained relevance, not by imposing new rules, but by revealing old ones. London adapted by treating norms as living systems. Standards were revised regularly. Defaults gained expiration dates. Conventions were stress-tested against new conditions. The system learned to update itself consciously rather than drift unconsciously. The lesson endured. The most dangerous rules are not the ones we argue about, but the ones we forget exist. Governance must reach beyond law into habit, design, and repetition. Power must be legible to remain legitimate. London did not eliminate invisible rulemakers. It made them visible enough to be governed. Subscribe to join the journey. The